Here we are, not fading away. Last session in the afternoon at the end of the Bad Festival. Welcome to Bad Sydney Crime Writers Festival, and welcome to all of those who are joining us on Zoom, including viewers throughout New South Wales who are watching from your local library or from home, courtesy of your local library. I'd like to begin by saying, of course, I'm not Tim Ailiff. Poor Tim, who is head of news at the ABC, had a bit of an accident when he was woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning to cover the demise of the monarch, and is unable to attend. He's fine, but we've had to quickly step in and cover his sessions. So you've got me here. So apologies for that, but here we are. And here we are indeed on Gadigal land, and as we gather to share stories and knowledge, let us reflect on the rich history of storytelling in this place. And I pay my respect to elders past and present, and to any First Nations people who are in the room. I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but if you could ensure that your phones are switched to silent or turned off so that there are no interruptions. Please don't record this session, and if you're taking photos, please turn off your flash. Social media at Bad Crime Sydney or hashtag Bad Crime Sydney 22. Emergencies out there, down the steps, over to the domain. Security guards will show you the way. And I am delighted to be with you here in the Dixon room this afternoon with our esteemed crime writing friend, Michael Robotham, who is such a good friend of Bad. Please give him a welcome.
Sorry, I didn't catch your name.
I'm Sue Turnbull. Hello. And I'm actually, Michael probably doesn't need much of an introduction. I mean, he's a prolific author, and we're here today, really, I suppose, to talk about this book. And I'm actually just going to do a quick show of hands. Let's just have a check. We're not going to do a readers group. We're not doing a book group, but I just would love to know how many people have actually read it so far. Oh, look at that.
How many people haven't read it?
But equal.
How many people have never read me before? Oh, two virgins.
Oh, to be converted. Well, you know, Michael wins quite a lot of prizes, and not just in Australia, Crime Writers Association in the UK. He's internationally renowned, and indeed, tomorrow we'll be flying to New Zealand to get on a bus. I'm so excited about this. He's getting on a bus with Val McDermott and JP Pomer, and they're touring around New Zealand, and it's called, what's it called?
Crime After Crime. The tour. We're going to be like a rock band.
So
we're going to have groupies. We're going to have fans throwing their Zimmer frames. And
I wanted to know where the merch was. Where's the T-shirt? You know, Crime After Crime, and on the back, the tour dates, you know, the bookshop, the date.
Yeah, absolutely. No. Well, look, either it's going to be an absolute, we'll kill each other in the first week, or we're going to be lifelong friends.
It's actually a great premise for a crime novel, isn't it? The crime writers on a bus traveling together. Yeah. Agatha Christie's already done. Did she? Which one was that? Oh, okay. I was going to say tour bus, Agatha Christie. Not sure. Okay. All right, Michael. The book. Let's just talk a little bit about this book, because it's actually the third in a series that features two characters, and I'm going to ask you to introduce the characters. But before you do that, did you intend it to be a series?
I guess after the first book was Good Girl, Bad Girl, and it introduced Cyrus Haven, forensic psychologist, and a very troubled young teenager at that point, Evie Cormac, who, and I'm going to have to sort of explain the story in a roundabout way in terms of why it was a series, is that Evie Cormac had been discovered at about the age of 10, hiding in a secret room in a house where a man had been tortured to death. And when we first meet her, she's in a children's home. She's now alleging that she's claiming that she's 18, but no one knows her true age. And when I got towards the end of Good Girl, Bad Girl, I realized that there's a lot of the mystery I could solve, but if I was going to actually reveal all the details of how Evie Cormac got in that secret room, the book was going to finish up being 200,000 words long. And so I had to finish that book, Good Girl, Bad Girl, at a point where everything you thought was going to be true about the person that put her in that room was going to get turned on its head, but you weren't going to find out exactly who was the person responsible until the second book. So I knew there had to be a second. So it was When She Was Good. And then I wasn't sure whether it was just going to be the two books in the series. And it was only, I guess, I fell in love with the two characters. I fell in love with Cyrus, the psychologist, because of his tragic backstory, being the sole survivor of when I say the sole survivor, his parents and twin sisters were murdered by his schizophrenic older brother when he was 13 years old. And so I knew that I wanted to explore his story. And more importantly, Evie Cormac, this young troubled teenager who can tell when someone's lying. I also knew I want to spend more time discovering what it would be like to go through life for Evie, being able to tell every time someone lies to her. And so I don't know how many books there'll be in it, but I thought each time there's still more for me to explore. And when I reach the point where I think there's nothing new I can say, that'll be the end.
That's interesting. Was it the same with Joe O'Loughlin? Was he, because Michael's previous series, which starts with The Suspect, features a character called Joe O'Loughlin. And if we've got people who are Robotham virgins in the room, they won't have read that one either. But you had a series where, but that one wasn't imagined as a series either, was it?
No, I mean, I created, I guess I was like most, I talked about being a writer since I was about 12 years old and become a journalist to gather material. And I'd reached the point where, I had a long career in journalism and then as a ghostwriting autobiographies for people. And I sort of knew at some point I was going to have to write this novel. And I thought, that if I was lucky, I'd get it published. And I've said this before, that, it would sell a dozen copies and my mother would buy 8 of them. And I thought that was going to be the way it would work. So when I wrote the first Joe O'Loughlin book, I didn't have plans that there'd be 8 or 9. I honestly thought if I get this book published, it would be a miracle. And if I did intend to have a long series, I mean, I gave Joe O'Loughlin early onset Parkinson's in that first book, because I love that tragic irony of having this man with his brilliant mind, but having a body that was slowly crumbling that he couldn't rely on. But if I thought that there was going to be many more books with him, I would never have done that, and even though it's so much of who he is as a person. So he was never supposed to be a series either. Yeah, it's always been quite accidental. I finish each book convinced I'll never write another, but
But you told me once, and I'm going to bring this one out of the drawer, that you did actually once write a crime novel set in Australia.
Yeah, well, it's a novel. I wouldn't even call it a crime novel. But yeah, no, I wrote what I refer to as the greatest ever unpublished Australian novel, and I often, which was almost published by Penguin in the UK, I missed out by a single vote, and I was told afterwards if I'd set that story in England, Ireland, Scotland, or Wales, they would have published it in a heartbeat. But because it was set in Australia, it was that little bit too hard for them to sell and market. And now, of course, I have publishers that are falling over themselves and want me to pull that book out of the bottom drawer. But while it remains in my bottom drawer, it will always be Australia's greatest ever unpublished novel.
But the climate's changed, hasn't it, in terms of Australian crime? Yeah,
no, back in that period of time, and we're talking back, this was back in the sort of mid-90s that Penguin rejected that. And, and it's funny, up until only probably 10 years ago, I had a very, very senior British publisher say to me that they would be happy if I set a book anywhere in the world except Australia. And where I remember asking why, and they said because no Australian crime novel, well, not none, because they're going all the way back. There are novels going way back, like the Boney novels and whatever that were successful internationally. But he said no recent Australian crime novel has ever been successful internationally. And I remember saying at the time, until one is. And of course, Jane Harper just blew the doors off that and just, created a complete phenomenon. And now Australian crime novels are being published all over the world to great acclaim.
It is true, isn't it? And I wondered if Jane was the start of that, because of course you won the Crime Writers Association award, but prior to that, Peter Temple had won.
Yeah, so Peter was the first Australian to win the Gold Dagger, which was sort of probably the Gold Dagger and the Edgars are the two great international crime awards, because they're open to all comers. It's not just the nationality, like the Ned Kelly Awards are only open to Australians, and this is an international award. Peter was the first Australian to win it. And realistic, if you look at it over the last year, I mean, Jane Harper won it. I've now won it twice. I mean, over that last 10 years, I think Australians have won it 4 times in 10 years, It's been, astonishing.
The climate really has changed. So let's come back to Lying Beside You. And I've got a confession to make. This is how dumb I am.
You haven't read it either.
I've read it several times and I've reviewed it. But this is the embarrassing thing. I didn't realize that the title was a pun until a bit later, because there's a double meaning to the lying beside you. I thought it was like lying beside you together in bed. But then I realized that there's a whole thing about lying in there. So
actually, I just got some message from a book club who did Lying Beside You in a book club. And they sent me a message on Facebook saying, but none of us could decide why. I mean, the title bore no relation at all to the book. And I'm thinking, I said, what book are you reading? I mean, yeah, it's
I was so dumb, and then I said, I get it now. It was just this light bulb moment, and I felt such a doofus. But yeah, I got it, because I was thinking, are they going to go to bed together? What's going to happen? Anyway, I've got it now. But let's talk about that book, because you did it in the first one, the alternation between Cyrus and Evie. And was that always part of the plan, that you would have a chapter focusing on Cyrus, a chapter on Evie, chapter on Cyrus?
Yeah, I guess it was something I employed when I wrote The Secret She Keeps, where I had, I don't know how many people here have read that book, with the 2 women, both of who are pregnant, whose babies are due at the same time, Megan and Agatha, and I wrote each a chapter from each of their points of view, and their stories collide. And I thought it's an unusual thing to do. You don't see it very often, and I thought it'd be great if I can make it work. And once I did it in the first book, because partly because I love writing Evie's voice. Evie makes me laugh. I mean, I think in my previous Joe O'Loughlin series, there was a side character called Vincent Ruiz, who got some of the best lines, and the best one-liners were his. And I think Evie gets probably the best lines in these books, And so as much as I like being in Cyrus's head, and again, I'm writing 2 first-person present voices here. I think Evie is just wonderfully sort of, I guess, unpredictable.
But I'm wondering how you do it, because Michael writes in the cabana of pain. What is it? The
cabana of cruelty.
The cabana of cruelty at the bottom of the garden. This is what it's called. And I'm wondering if, as you're walking to the cabana, it's a Cyrus day, or if you're walking to the cabana, it's an Evie day. I'm going to get,
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that you think it'd be easier just to stick to one voice. And I got to remember back in the day, my background was as a ghostwriter, and as a journalist, and then a ghostwriter. And when I was ghostwriting, it would be like spending a year living inside someone else's head. So whether it were, Tony Bullimore or Lulu or Jerry Halliwell, or you're trying to capture their voice so that no one recognizes my fingerprints on the story. And I would always joke that, when you finished a project, you had to get that voice out of your head, and to work on a new book where you had like Jerry Halliwell, get out of my head, And I used to think that I could have written War and Peace and made it sound like Jerry Halliwell, you know. But it's very much, I find it easy now to jump between characters. And I think at times, because the hardest part about writing In Secret She Keeps was the two women's stories and keeping both of them in the same time frame. Both equally had to be equally compelling. You couldn't have one story racing ahead of the other. They had to be at the same point in their timelines, but each had to be equally compelling until their lives, these two women, their lives don't collide until halfway through the book, you know, when a baby goes missing, you know. But up until that point, you have to keep their stories tracking together. And I find with the same when you're writing Evie and Cyrus. So you do have to jump between the two, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to keep their stories together, if you know what I mean.
So that suggests to me that in order to do that, you've pretty much got the structure in your head before you start. Yeah.
Never.
Okay. No. So you are what they call a pantser, right?
Yes.
Do you know
I got 75-80% of the way through Lying Beside You and had no idea who the villain was going to be.
Right. There's this term pantser. There's the plotters and the pantsers, or the planners and the pantsers. I can't remember which is which, but anyway, it's crime writers identify themselves as the people who write, you know, like flying by the seat of your pants. And Val McDermott told me at one point that she used to write like this. Her metaphor was, I write by the light of my headlights, right? I can only see as far as my headlights, and I don't know what's out there in the dark. And then she had a switch at some point.
She started as a plotter.
Yes.
And she switched the other way to more that, I think it was the El Doctoro that said you can make it, any journey can be made as long as you can see as far as the headlights, and you can write that way. And I think, and so Val is much happier now being a parent. I actually have my analogy is a pioneer or a settler. Okay, and to me, there are some people as writers who are pioneers that literally charge forward with an idea, plant the flag, thinking, great, I'll come back here and I'll build a town or write a chapter. But then they'll charge forward with an outline, plant another flag on the next hill and go, this will be my second chapter or my second town. And they just race through, and then they go back and they build the towns, you know, of their story. Whereas I am very much a settler, that I will go forward, I will write a chapter, and when I'm really happy with everything I've built in that chapter, then I will go out and explore where the story will go next. But I won't know where it's going to go next until I've finished and built that first one.
Is that anxiety producing?
It's like writing without a net. It's like, and you do throw lots of words away at times, because the best way I can describe that you don't get anxious about writing that way is that at any given time, it's like when I said I've just built the town, I know that there are 5 or 6 or 7 ways I can go next. The moment that I can see there's only one way for that story to go, that's when I get anxious, because if that's off a cliff, there's no going back. You've just got to throw so much away. So as long at any given time in the process, I can see that the next chapter could have this in it and go that way or this way, or I could do this. And that way I can maybe spend a few days investigating one and then come back and investigate another way, but I've got options. So it's anxiety inducing if there are no options.
But it would also be, I would have thought, more interesting and exciting to have the options, because it's the exploring that is.
When I come in from the cabana, like when I come in and say to Vivian, you would not believe what just happened. You know, if I don't see it coming, then I figure the reader won't see it coming. So to me, it's incredibly organic and it's very exciting. I mean, it's anxiety inducing because, you know, when I reach a point in the story where my hero or when the people I've grown, well, if I do my job properly, I don't just love them, my reader will love them. They will love these characters. I think one of my favorite ever quotes from another writer was Linwood Barclay, Canadian writer, said that I don't just feel for Michael's character, my heart breaks for them, you know, and when they are in great danger and I don't know how to save them, that's when it's anxiety, because I'm sitting there thinking, I have to save. And look, people may have heard me tell a story before, but the classic case of that for me was when I wrote my first novel, the first Joe O'Loughlin. triggered a bidding war at the London Book Fair in 2002 and sold into 22 translations in 3 hours on 117 pages. And I had no idea how it ended. I had no idea it was a crime novel. And so people all around the world had bought this book. And I got to about 80 or 90,000 words in, and Joe O'Loughlin, you know, his brilliant career was crumbling around him. His marriage was on the rocks. He was being sought for murder by the police, and he was on the run. And I had no idea how this man with a brilliant mind was going to save himself. I mean, I thought, how do I finish this book? How do I get him out of this? And so after days of sort of fretting over this, I finally had that eureka moment when I realized how he was going to use that amazing intellect to double cross the people that were playing God with his life. But I then wrote manically for 16 hours straight to get it down, because I was terrified that if I got hit by a bus, Joe O'Loughlin would go to prison for the rest of his life for murder. So I had to get that down. I was the only person on the planet that knew how to save him, and I had to save him.
You know, it's funny you should say that, because as a reader, I have that experience sometimes too, in the sense that when I'm reading, if the character is in peril, I have to keep reading until they're out of peril. Has anybody else had that experience? You cannot put the book down until they're safe.
Yeah, my favorite was, someone once said to me they were reading one of my books and they needed 2 hands to read the book, because they needed 1 hand to cover their eyes and 1 hand to cover the page in front so they didn't jump ahead.
I've described it as reading with your eyes shut. You know, I've actually said that, you know, there are some books that I have to read with my eyes shut. So I also know that experience too. It's like, ooh, okay, we go like that. But so, yes, so clearly, I love that analogy that of the writing to save and we're reading to save. So we're all embarked on the same kind of strategy. And of course, the terrible thing is that you get to the end and they're saved and you go, oh, that was great. I've got to do it again. So it's the ride, isn't it? It's very much, I think there was an American academic called Patricia Mellencamp who talked about crime fiction in relation to an era of anxiety, that we all have anxiety, and that crime fiction, she wasn't talking specifically about crime fiction, she was talking about television, I think, but television series, but she was talking about the fact that we read to allay it because we get that closure, we get to the end, we save the character. But the anxiety doesn't go away because that's the condition of our times. So we have to do it again to save them again.
And I can't, it's funny, I mean, probably the darkest, purest psychological thriller that I ever wrote was a book called Shatter. Okay. And it's, when I say purest psychological thriller, very few people die in that book, but it is an absolutely terrifying premise based on a real life story. And people, I mean, my wife would only read it during the daylight. And she said afterwards, we would never be invited to dinner again because no one would have a sick bastard like me in their house. But people still come up to me and sort of say, oh my God, that book, that's my favorite book. And I'll go, you are a sick, sick puppy, because that book is so dark. It's so, and to me, I don't like being scared. You know, people have heard me say it before that, you know, on my mother's son, my mother once screamed so loudly in a cinema, they stopped the film and turned the lights up. Well, that is me, you know, and you know, I'm always amazed that people, they do want to go there and be scared, you know.
It's not so much scared as caring. I mean, it's the investment in the characters and wanting to see them safely out the other side, or just to make sure that they're all right, with some anxiety that they might not be, you know, like Joe O'Loughlin might go to prison. I want to see them out the other side. And in fact, I found with this book that I cared so much about the 2 central characters, about Cyrus and about Evie, that I was quite emotionally moved. There's a moment in the book where I actually found myself in tears because I found them so moving in their relationship with each other. And that's the investment that you want from a reader.
Oh,
isn't
yeah.
it?
And the thing is, and look, and actually, when we talked last down in Bury, Sue and I did an event down in Bury, and there was a lovely retired doctor down there who began quoting passages of the books back to me that he said, you made me cry in this book, and you made me cry in that book and that scene. And I told him that I cried when I wrote those scenes, and I cried not just when I wrote them, but I cried on the 12th rewrite. I would still find myself, yeah, no, it's, I think to me, it's about creating a character that lives and breathes in my imagination. And if I care that desperately, and it sounds terrible to have created this character you care so much about and then doing horrible things to them, into putting them in horrible situations. But I figure that's the moment. I mean, to me, the 3 words that try to sum up my philosophy on writing is make them care, as in make the reader care.
Well, you have to, because as a reader, and as you know, I read a lot of crime fiction. If I don't care, I probably won't finish the book.
We're all the same. If we're watching anything or we're reading something and we realize there comes a moment where we do not care about a single character, we don't care if they get the girl, don't get the girl, solve the crime or not, because we just don't like any of them. I mean, there are some wonderful examples of books, and Gone Girl is the one that immediately comes to mind, where you don't like any of the characters, but they're still compelling and you want to get to the end. But I don't think I'm as good a writer as Gillian Flynn. And so I think I've got to make people care to make them want to stay with my characters.
Okay, let's come back, because I know you have some wonderful lines about lying and what you've discovered about lying, because Evie is a truth wizard, and I didn't know this thing existed, but apparently it does.
It does, yeah. No, there are about 1 in 500 people have an 80% ability to tell when someone is lying. Most of the ones that have been identified have come from law enforcement or child services or the prison system, or they've been lied to their entire lives, and they develop this skill. Because the truth of the matter is that most of us, and I include myself in this, is we've got a 50-50 shot. I could be lying to you now, and you've got a 50-50 shot of saying to me whether I'm telling you the truth or not. But what fascinated me most in all the research, and I did so much research into lying, was that, we lie between 10 and 200 times a day. And I know I've had people that pull me up and say, no, I never lie. And I'm going, yeah, but, you're looking so good, you haven't aged a bit, and I love your hair. I'm 5 minutes away. I only had the 1 beer. I've read the terms and conditions. We lie all the time, but we lie for the best possible reasons. We lie because we want to make people feel comfortable. We want to make them feel relaxed, and it's and there's a reason why there aren't, thankfully, many Evie Cormacs in the world, because it is a curse. The idea of being able to tell when someone who says, I love you, or I missed you, or even something, oh, that's so interesting, where you think, that's bullshit. You don't think that's interesting at all. The reason, over all these tens of thousands of years of human evolution, because you would have thought we would have got better at picking lies, but we'd only get better if there was some benefit to us getting better. But there's no benefit for us getting better at picking lies, because in fact, it would just destroy relationships, destroy families, and and it's the nature of, so we're much happier, we're much happier. And that's why there's something, and we're fascinated by lies. We watch all those shows like Tinder Swindler, and listen to podcasts like Melissa Caddick and Liar Liar, and so many of our shows we watch are all about deception and lies. And time and again, when we're surveyed, we say that honesty is what we admire most in other people. We want people to be honest, and the truth of the matter is, no, we don't. We don't. I think, and there's something which I came across. It's called the liar's advantage, and it's why con men and con women get away with it. It's why the psychopath operates so successfully, is that we are hardwired to want to believe people. So if you met someone today who said that they were a pilot, unless you had a reason to believe they were lying to you, you would just assume, well, they're a pilot. So straight away, that's the liar's advantage, that we are predisposed to believe what we're being told. And no, I think it's completely fascinating, this idea of lying.
So Evie, of course, lies herself, though, doesn't she?
Oh, she's a compulsive liar.
She's a compulsive liar, but Cyrus wheels her in every now and again. He uses her as a kind of canary, doesn't he? The canary down the mine. He brings her in and goes, telling the truth.
Well, it's what I don't know whether he does. Oftentimes she's accidentally become, or peripherally, she's been on the periphery of something, because one of the things, you know, I was always aware of when I created Evie as a character, that, you know, if a crime writer that creates a character who can tell when someone's lying is on track to write the shortest crime novel in history. So that's why Evie can never become like an offsider, because she would literally walk into, like someone even said in a session this morning, you know, why don't they use a truth wizard like that in every courtroom to decide who's lying? And I said, well, yes, the best they've ever discovered at the moment through testing has got an 85% ability to pick up on lies and emotional lies and physical lies and verbal lies. But 85% is not good enough in a courtroom, you know. But, you know, it's, so Evie's always on, occasionally she'll find out things, but I don't think I can ever have it. And it's why I think the series might not go for a long, long time. I can never involve her at the heart of the investigation, because she would solve it too quickly. You know, she would immediately just dismiss that, you know.
Yeah, so quite a tricky character to kind of handle.
Yeah,
you know.
That's why, I mean, I had the idea many years ago and I couldn't work out how to put her in a book. And it was only when I realized that if I made her this incredibly dysfunctional, damaged, pathological, you know, lying sort of teenager, where no one believed her when she did tell them something, I could get away with someone like that.
And you have 3 daughters. When did this character come to you?
There's a bit of Evie, or there's a bit of them and Evie, you know, but I think there's always been, I think with all my characters, like Joe O'Loughlin had daughters, and there were Charlie, his eldest daughter. There were lines that Charlie had that came from my children. You know, I think I think in the book, it might have been a book called Bleed for Me, which is actually roughly based on the whole Chris Dawson case. And I wrote that years ago.
What was it called again?
Bleed for Me.
Yes.
And about a school teacher that kills his wife and brings her and marries the schoolgirl. And there's a moment in that where Joe O'Loughlin discovers that his oldest daughter's best friend is sexually active. So he decides he's going to confront his daughter, Charlie, and ask her whether she's sexually active. And she just turns it back on him so beautifully and says to him, you know, Dad, you know, I could lie to you and say no and just, you know, and disappoint you for lying. Or I could tell you the truth and say yes and disappoint you because I'm having sex. So I'm just pleading the 5th. And you can see him sort of walk away going, what the hell just happened?
Being outmaneuvered.
Yeah.
So you can draw on, you know, experience as well, but you also do a lot of research, and you've talked about the joy of, I mean, it's quite palpable how much pleasure you actually get from writing. But you know, as someone as an academic, I actually think that the real pleasure is doing the research. Is it for you?
I think research is a double-edged sword. I mean, I think too many writers fall in love with their research and try to keep changing their ideas or squeeze another really interesting fact in there. I mean, it's a bit like, you know, they talk about killing your babies. I mean, there's a scene that I wrote with Joe O'Loughlin, a Joe O'Loughlin scene, my favorite ever Joe O'Loughlin scene, which has never appeared in a book. And every Joe O'Loughlin book, I put this scene in saying, I want that scene. I want that scene. And every time I took it out because I'm saying, just the story slows down too much. I don't need that scene. So I think research is a bit like that. I mean, I adore the research, but I learned a long while ago to do just enough research to make sure that my story doesn't have massive plot holes that are going to make it all disintegrate. And then go back and walk the streets and talk to the pathologists and when the pathologist will sometimes say, well, that would never happen, then you'll go, okay, what would happen? Tell me. And the really good ones that help you will go, okay, well, you could change it to that and that would work. And yeah, and I just sort of to me, that's otherwise, it's a bit like the same with those people that plot, they're talking about plotters, you know, the Jeffrey Deavers who would write a 240-page outline of a book and then begin writing. I mean, I get too excited about the story after I've got the first idea that I just want to start writing. And same as when it comes to research, as much as I do love the research, I just want to start writing. You know, so I never let it get me bogged down.
Because this book is set in Nottingham. I'm remembering that, and so I had the sense that you knew Nottingham well, but
well, I knew Nottingham well in the sense that one of the very first ghostwritten books I ghostwrote was for a woman called Margaret Humphreys, who that was a book called Empty Cradles. I made into a film called Oranges and Sunshine a number of years ago. She was the social worker who uncovered the child migrant scandal and set up the Child Migrant Trust, you know, where, you know, that 150,000 children were shipped out of children's homes in Britain and sent to America and Canada and Australia and South Africa, and she lived in Nottingham. And so I spent, when I was ghostwriting, I spent quite a bit of time up in Nottingham with her. But initially when I was thinking, I wanted to set the book out of London, and my initial idea was to set it in Coventry. I wanted it because I've got a big international readership, to set it somewhere that everyone had heard of. And I thought, well, everyone's heard of Coventry. You know, they heard the term being sent to Coventry, and they know sort of Lady Godiva and that story. And so I actually planned my whole research trip, went to the UK, got to Coventry, intending to spend about 10 days there, and discovered it was a complete shithole. And it's not Coventry's fault. It is just that it got bombed into virtual oblivion by the Luftwaffe, and they've rebuilt it with this very brutalist, you know, concrete. And so it's a beautiful, you know, people, don't get me wrong, but it's just not a very picturesque city. And I suddenly thought, okay, where else can I set the book where everyone's heard of? And well, everyone's heard of Nottingham, you know, and because of the whole Robin Hood, you know, the Sheriff of Nottingham. But the funny thing about that was that ultimately, when I got my American edition was being edited, I had to put extra paragraphs in to explain to American readers that Nottingham was a real place, because they thought it was like Hogwarts. And that the whole thing was like Hogwarts and, you know, Harry Potter and Robin Hood. It was all just sort of make believe. And so there's extra paragraphs in the book to explain that Nottingham is a real place.
And of course, Robin Hood was a real person as well, sort of. I want to talk a little bit about adaptations, because in fact, you've been adapted quite a lot. We had a panel day before yesterday, the first day, about screenwriters and novelists turning to screenwriting and screenwriters turning to writing novels. And you've been adapted quite a few times. In fact, you were adapted for German television way before anything appeared. So you were really successful in Germany. Was that the Joe O'Loughlin series in Germany?
Yeah, so the Germans have made 8 films out of the Joe O'Loughlin novels. And they're now working on a Cyrus Haven and Evie adaptation as well in Germany.
Oh.
And yeah, I have the unique privilege that right now in the UK, I have 2 TV series airing. I've got The Secret She Keeps on the BBC, and I've got The Suspect is airing on ITV.
It's got both the bases covered.
Yeah.
Both the audiences. So The Suspect, which was the first Joe O'Loughlin,
yeah,
has now been adapted as a 6-part?
It's a 5-part series. It's being made by World Productions, who made The Bodyguard and Line of Duty and The Bletchley Circle and Vigil, and and that is available as of 2 days ago. It's on BritBox here in Australia, one of the streaming services. It will almost certainly go to one of the networks, but it's a bit like Paramount now are holding on to The Secret She Keeps 2, which is being shown in the UK. But eventually that will go to Channel 10 here. But the streaming services like holding onto it to get more subscriptions. But my advice, BritBox aren't going to like me, is to, if you want to watch The Suspect, is wait a few weeks. It's only the first 2 episodes are up. It'll take another 3 weeks until all 5 episodes are up. You can get a week's free subscription on BritBox. You can just binge them all. And that way you can You may decide you want BritBox after that, but at least you can watch it without having to subscribe to yet another streaming service.
And you'll never guess who's playing Joe O'Loughlin. And I've forgotten the actor's name, but it's Poldark.
Aidan Turner,
Aidan Turner.
Who was the handsome dwarf in the Hobbit movies. He was Poldark in the remake of Poldark, and he was the vampire in Being Human.
Was he the vampire or the werewolf? I can't remember.
No, he was the vampire. The vampire in Being Human. Very handsome Irishman. I mean, yeah. There's an iconic photograph of him with his shirt off, which is almost as famous as Colin Firth playing Mr. Darcy in the white shirt, but maybe more famous.
It's true. It's the Poldark.
Well, it's interesting. It's one thing about having an actor, and he's a wonderful actor, but there's about 140 Aidan Turner fan sites on the internet. And of course, they just go off on everything to do with Aidan Turner. So my social media feed is just full of nothing but sort of Aidan Turner stuff ever since The Suspect aired. The first episode a week or two ago was.
But I've seen a photograph of him as Joe O'Loughlin, and he looks dead serious. He looks.
Yeah.
He looks.
Well, I mean, I guess the clue is in the title. You know, the book is called The Suspect, and the issue with this is, and even when you read the book, you know, there's a point in that book where you suddenly think, actually, is he going to be guilty? You know, and the TV very much played that up idea of, actually, this guy could actually be guilty of these murders that they think he's done, you know.
Well, in the panel about screenwriting and novelists, we had Roger Simpson, who was an extraordinary screenwriter. Simpson, Le Mesurier, they did Stingers, they did Good Guys, Bad Guys, they did Halifax FB, and Roger has just written a Halifax standalone book, right? And when he was asked by the audience, you know, what he preferred, you know, did he like the screenwriting or how was he finding writing a novel? He said it was terrifying writing a novel because he had nobody to blame. Because when you've got a screenplay, you can blame the producer, the director, the actors, you can blame everybody else, right, for not getting your script right. But he found writing a novel terrifying. How have you found the relationship, you know?
Yeah, no, I come from a completely different angle. With The Secret She Keeps, the second series, which isn't based on a novel, obviously, because there was only one novel, and they've just I've helped storyboard it, and I've written one of the episodes. But in that whole process, what I discovered was what I love most about what I do, and this sounds really conceited, is that as a writer, I'm God, you know, and even though I've got editors all around the world, ultimately, you know, and if they all tell me the same thing, I'd be mad to ignore them. But ultimately, it's my decision. I decide what goes in that book, you know, and I can. But when you get involved in TV and film, you know, there are producer notes, network notes, distributor notes, director notes, actor notes. Every bastard out there that thinks they can make your script better, and I just realized that I seriously don't play well with other people, you know, and so. When people say, "Oh, wasn't it great? Didn't you love it? Don't you want to get involved?" And I'm like, "No, I don't. I just want to just write my novels and, you know, and
do your own thing." We're going to open up for questions in just a few minutes, but actually, I've got a little follow-up question for you. And by the way, Zoom audience, please do send in your questions as well on the chat function. We can get Zoom questions and read them out as well. But I seem to recall that you have that, you know, because you're published in different countries, you are likely to get notes from different publishers, but you now insist that you only get one set of notes. You let the editors from different countries sit in the room on their own, right?
Yeah, no, certainly all the English speaking languages. Yeah, no, the rule is they all go into a room and whoever comes out alive gets to hand their notes over. And yeah, so it's survival of the fittest in that room. And that's because I got fed up with, I guess, you know, everyone's different. You get some editors saying, "Oh, I love that character. Can we have more of her? Oh, I hated that character. Can we have less of her?" You know, and like they're just conflicting notes. And you're seeing the thing, well, I can't please both people. So I figure argue it out. If I agree, I will do it. And yeah, no, but I love it. I love the notes that come in from the translators because they're fascinating, you know, because you suddenly realize with language, languages. I mean, my favorite one was always, I remember one from the Dutch. I mentioned the butterfly effect. Like we all understand the term, the butterfly effect. Well, in the Netherlands, the butterfly is a symbol of death. So the term butterfly effect has a completely different meaning in the Netherlands to what it does in Dutch than it was in English. But the translator was so good that the translator was pretty sure they knew what I meant. But again, context should be absolutely sure that this is what I meant. But yeah.
But you must be getting to the stage where you can tell the editors that you're not going to do it. I mean, I'm just saying this because I just got delivered J.K. Galbraith's latest tome. It's over 1,000 pages. And I'm going, she must be uneditable.
Yeah, I think that this is one of Joe Rowling's great problems with the later Harry Potter books. Got far too wordy and long. And no, look, there is a process. Like I get my first editorial notes, and I will write the most poisonous. What sort of effing idiot thinks that you don't understand the book? It will be just. I mean, I will just spill out. I spent a year writing this thing. You don't understand the book, and it's just you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. And I won't send it. And I will sleep on it. And the next morning I'll wake up and I'll read it and go, "Ooh, a little harsh, a little harsh." Yeah, okay. I'll sleep on that another day, and then the next day I'll go back and sort of say, "Okay, you're not completely wrong." Not completely wrong. Bits of it are probably right, and eventually I will choose those bits that I think are good advice. But my first reaction, which my wife has always realised, because Vivian's my number one designated reader, and Vivian just says all the time, "It's brilliant, it's brilliant." I say, "What can I make better?" Nothing. It's brilliant. There's a reason we've been married 35 years. Okay. She just knows I am not going to be the person that tells him. I'm going to let someone else get paid to do that.
See, I once actually gave my son honest feedback on something he wrote, and he's claimed it to destroyed his will to live. He still talks about it. We're having dinner tonight. He'll probably bring it up. Do we have any questions from the audience or questions from Zoom? Anybody would like to? We've got a microphone as well. So if you would like to ask a question, pop your hand up so that people can hear it.
Shy.
And yeah, no, don't be shy. Give it a go. There we go. Here we go. Up the front. Yes, it's got to be the first one.
Michael, I was at the panel where that person said the fascinating thing about why don't we have a truth wizard in the courts too? And that panel talked a lot about narcissistic personality disorder, and we toss that term around all the time. Like, all of us know someone with a narcissistic personality disorder. Well, I recently had contact with someone who had a very unusual name. So I looked him up, and he had an extensive criminal record, and his psych report was on the internet. Do not have a criminal record. And he had a narcissistic personality disorder. And I'd only ever seen still photos of him, and he was a funny looking man. And I thought, I wonder how he's beguiling people, because he's like drop dead ugly. But then I saw him at a meeting. He was at a meeting, and he came online, had that funny looking face, and then he started moving his face. And I thought, you know what? He's really attractive. And it was something he was doing with his face.
Yeah, no, well, it's interesting. It's interesting you say that, because I have, from a psychological point of view, like we see photographs of, let's just say, Ivan Milat, and you go, "Oh, doesn't he look like an evil bastard?" I mean, just evil. But before you knew what Ivan Milat had done, you'd pass that guy in the street, or he'd be drinking in your local pub or whatever. You wouldn't think twice about it, because we often put, after the event, we put these things. And then similarly, that idea of the transformative face. I mean, my best example was Helena Bonham Carter. Okay. I remember going to do a interview with her when I was a journalist. And she had a head full of cold, and like red nose and just runny eyes. And I'm thinking, my God, she did not look her best. And then the photographer put the camera on her, and you saw the photographs that came out of it, and she was absolutely stunning. It was like she could just seem to transform in front of a camera and become this different creature. Yeah. And it's, I mean, I think that's the great beauty of, I mean, the true manipulative sort of narcissist, well, the narcissist is different from the psychopath, but the true high functioning psychopath has an astonishing ability. And they have, as I said, the liar's advantage, because people want to believe them. They have that in their favor, but they, just quite, well, and it's interesting. Actually, another thing I'll tell you about, I remember Paul Britton, a psychologist that I wrote 2 books with, who was the pioneer of offender profiling in the UK. He had a patient one day who believed they were a werewolf. And in the midst of a session, he said this person transformed, and he said he'd never seen it happen with the body, where everything, the way his shoulders twisted up and his face, his jaws seemed to lengthen, and he took on all these sort of features. And he said, and this guy just had, in his mind, he was becoming a werewolf, and he just seemed to be physically changing. And his voice, he said, was the creepiest thing. His voice dropped so many octaves. He said it was absolutely chilling, to watch this guy transform in front of him. And it was all done, he convinced himself he was a werewolf.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we got another question up the front. Oh, hang on, wait for the mic. Gwen's sprinting towards you with the speed of light. Here we go.
Hello. I'd like to ask you a question about the process of writing. What do you do if you get stuck? One of the other authors talked about, she was a planner, and if she got stuck, she'd go back and realise she needed to put the gun on the mantelpiece or whatever. Given that you don't like to plan and you like to write organically, do you have to do lots of rewrites? Do you have to sort of discard a lot of your plot and then rewrite it again so it makes sense? How do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, going back to what I said earlier about having those different avenues, like finishing a chapter and knowing it could go different ways. Sometimes I will explore for a day or two and begin writing another scene. And it might not be that I don't think that scene's good, but I thought, well, maybe it's a better way to go, and I'll write another way. And that will mean discarding stuff. And it will mean, like, as I mentioned, that I was probably 80% of the way through Lying Beside You before I decided who the villain was going to be. But that then requires me going back and planting more clues and layering that in to make it, to give people an opportunity to pick it. So it's not as though anything I write early on is set in stone. It's just when I make that decision, I can go back. And I guess the other advantage in terms of getting stuck and writer's block is that even though I don't plot ahead, invariably there's 1 or 2 scenes that I know are coming. There might be a subplot going in the story. It's a bit like in Lying Beside You, there's obviously a crime that Cyrus is asked to help solve, the murder of a man and the disappearance of a woman. But the main subplot is the fact that his schizophrenic brother, after 20 years, is applying to be released from Rampton Psychiatric Hospital. And so there's going to be a scene where he comes home. Okay, I don't know where it's going to go in the book, but I know there's going to be that scene. So if I'm stuck, I can always just jump forward and write that scene, knowing that at some point I'll slot that in, And so that's a lot of the ways I do it. If I know something's coming, I can jump forward and write those scenes, just so I don't come to a dead halt, just so I give myself time to think of the next way forward.
Okay. Do we have another question? Yeah, we've got one up the front. Here comes Gwen.
Could you hold the microphone a bit closer to you?
I often wonder how authors choose names for their characters, and how important do you think that is?
It's interesting. I mean, some of them are based on, some of them are auctioned for charity. I mean, I think in someone quite recently in my next book, I can't mention the name because it's a surprise for that person. A friend has bought it for them, but someone's paid, I think it was $15,000 to be a character in my next book. And just to name a character, it's not going to be them. And that money went to the Northern Beaches Women's Shelter, a really good charity. Oddly enough, the only time I've ever, I have mentioned friends, dropped a few sort of, mates' names in at times and thrown it in, knowing that they'll get I don't like doing that very often, because I hope when people are reading this, they're completely transported, you know, that they are in the story and with my characters. And if suddenly they read their own name or read a friend's name, that spell is broken, and they think, and they laugh. They might laugh and they get a kick out of it, but they'll also realize this is just a story they're reading. It's not, you know, I want them to believe this is going on. But I guess the only time I've ever really made a conscious effort in choosing a name, when I chose the name Cyrus Haven, I wanted, because given that he was going to be a psychologist, and he was going to take people into quite dark psychological territory at times with the writing, the books that I write. And Cyrus is going to be their guide in a sense, and especially like Joe O'Loughlin, you went into some dark places in a book like Shatter, but I think people were willing to go there because Joe O'Loughlin, they felt in safe hands that he would bring them out without traumatizing them, that there would be some sort of redemptive justice, you know, ending of justice. So, but when I chose the name Cyrus Haven, the word haven, I felt was a comforting word, you know, and I looked at Shepherd was another one, like a surname. I think I wanted a name that just, I guess, and it's the only time I've ever done it consciously, you know, chosen the name where I felt it had that double meaning.
A bit of reassurance. Do we have another question? If we don't, I've got one last one for you, Michael, which is, are you going to be writing on the bus? Or what are you writing next? I mean, you're taking a break from writing.
Yeah, next year will be the first year in a long while that I don't have a book. And that's partly because I want my foreign translations to catch up. And also because I also want a break. But I am writing another Evie and Cyrus book at the moment. And in a sense, it's a bit of a creation story for Evie. Like, we know a lot about Evie Cormac, but we don't know the full story of who Evie is. And so I'm writing that one at the moment. And I will be writing on the bus because I sort of write every day and I write longhand. So, you know, I will be writing on tour.
That's a revelation. You write longhand still?
Yeah.
What, not on a computer? Not at all?
Well, no, I will write for probably 2 or 3 days in a book, and then I will take it to the computer. And all the later drafts are on computer, but the original first draft begins on paper. And then after 2 or 3 days, I can't leave it too long before I put it on the computer because my handwriting's so appalling that I can't read anything I've written. And so I will then I have this theory, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, it's like Graham Greene, one of the great, I love Graham Greene, and one of his great quotes was that putting words on the page is the last part of the writing process, that in fact he believed that it was all the hard work was done in your subconscious, and that putting words on the page was the final thing. And so I think that's true. And I also find that when I'm writing dialogue, it's just sharper on paper. I just write sharper, punchier dialogue when I'm writing it on paper than I do when I'm writing it on screen.
Well, for someone who also enjoys writing on paper,
I have very similar books. Mine are a bit bigger, but the same. I buy the same sort of notebooks as that you use.
Yeah, they're just fantastic. Michael, thank you so much. We are finishing up now. I think you're going to go over and sign some books in the room. I want you to take this one with you, if you would, back to the bookstore. And
do that. So if anyone's bought a book along, having already read it, I don't care. Bring it over.
This is the last session, so we don't need to worry anything about the room. There is a survey about the festival. I'd like to thank you all for coming, but please join with me in thanking Michael Robotham for fabulous